Welcome Mr. Thomas as the second of the Harold H. Hines Jr. Visiting Fellows. I'd like to say just a couple of words about Harold Hines, and especially about his relationship to the school. Several years before his very untimely death, Harold Hines headed the school's long-range planning committee. Some of us who were close to him were sure that there was really one part of the long-range planning committee, of the long-range plan, that was particularly important to him and about which he cared the most. And it was entitled Social Purpose. He was very clear in his thinking on this topic. In fact, those of you who knew Harold know that clarity of thinking was of utmost importance to him. He believed strongly that private institutions have a compelling public purpose. He would, for instance, quiz me regularly on North Shore's commitment to that goal. He believed, as I do, that students from this school should graduate with a sense of responsibility to the larger society and a determination to better the world around them. In fact, part of the long-range plan mandated that part of the school's interim week program significantly increase the awareness of students of social problems. Harold Hines believed that schools like ours should stand for something. He believed that schools like ours should have a major leadership role in the world around us, and that we need to articulate what we mean by the school's commitment to service. And so, in memory of Harold H. Hines Jr., who had served as president of the Board of Trustees, as well as in a myriad of other capacities, the following resolution was passed by our trustees. Resolved that the Board of Trustees recognizes the special relationship which the Hines family has with North Shore. Harold's association with the school started in 1959 when Bill entered junior kindergarten. Actually, his relationship really began when he married Mary Peck Hines, herself a graduate of North Shore. His ties strengthened when he sent his other two fine children to North Shore for 14 years each. Bill graduated in 1973, Ann in 77, and David in 1981. Until his untimely death, Harold's commitment touched students, parents, and faculty by his many years of devotion to the school. Who associated with North Shore cannot remember Harold's penetrating questions on the unpopular side of the debate, just to make sure that we had properly and ethically investigated all sides of the issue. Resolved finally that in recognition of our love for Harold Hines and our admiration for his character, capabilities, and commitment, the North Shore Country Day School shall establish an endowed visiting fellowship in memory of Harold H. Hines Jr., which brings a distinguished individual to the campus who articulates the challenges of the school's philosophy, live and serve. Special emphasis will be placed on ethical considerations of social issues, giving students the opportunity to define more clearly their responsibility to society. The school community's exposure to the fellow should expand existing perceptions in a constructive way, thus creating a living testimonial to the ideals Harold Hines exemplified. And so here we are. We have looked forward both to tonight's event and also to tomorrow morning when a panel of students have the opportunity to ask questions of Mr. Thomas concerning his talk this evening. The students are from this school as well as from the Latin School of Chicago, Lake Forest Academy Surrey Hall, New Trier High School, Glenbrook South High School. The moderator will be the editor-in-chief of North Shore Student Newspaper. We would be very pleased if any of you who are here tonight and guests of ours tonight would like to join with us at 9:15 tomorrow in our school auditorium. We would be delighted to welcome you. Now, at this time, it seems very appropriate that I introduce to you Mr. Donald Perkins. He is himself a former Board of Trustees chairman. He also has three children who attended North Shore for 14 years each. At the memorial service for Harold Hines, I was struck by his observation that he met Harold for the first time in kindergarten. Not when he was a student, but when Jerry Perkins and Bill Hines were students in kindergarten, members of the class of 1973 at North Shore. He was and is a close personal friend to all of the Hines family and to this school. So let me present to you then Mr. Donald Perkins, who will introduce Mr. Thomas to you.
expenditure that the Perkins and Hines family shared. As I thought about this evening, it brought to my mind some attributes of people which I find particularly appealing. I enjoy people who listen well, who laugh a lot, and who continue to grow mentally throughout their lives. I enjoy people who get things done and always with integrity. I enjoy people for whom personal reputation and credibility matter far more than fame or money or applause. I enjoy people who spend their lives expressing themselves for others because that is what is fundamental to their own happiness. These attributes describe why I have enjoyed both Harold Hines and Frank Thomas, and why it is so fitting, I think, for remarkable Frank to be with us as we remember remarkable Harold. Now, what type of person ends up leading the world's largest private foundation with assets of $4.7 billion and annual grants exceeding $200 million? Well, he starts out as a smart jock. He had to be smart because he didn't get an athletic scholarship when he went to Columbia. He had to wait on papers. But he was a good enough basketball player, so I don't know what they called him walk-ins back in those days, right? Walk-ons. He ended up setting the rebounding record for Columbia University and was named the most valuable basketball player in the Ivy League both in 1955 and 1956. Frank graduated, went to the Air Force, became a captain, was promised all sorts of future in the Air Force, but decided to return to Columbia to get his law degree. At the age of 31, he became Deputy Police Commissioner of New York City. And in 1966, thanks to the entreaties of Bobby Kennedy, began 10 years as president of the Veteran-Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation, which was the pioneer and the most successful urban community development corporation that this country has seen. To cite just a few accomplishments of taking an area that was as downtrodden, had as little belief in themselves as any area in the country, perhaps matching certain areas of the south and west side of Chicago. In those 10 years, under Frank's leadership, Bed-Stuy, as it's called in the New York area, added over 3,000 jobs in the community, refurbished over 3,300 homes, added a $6 million shopping complex, persuaded IBM to put in a plant, but most significantly, replaced decay and unrest with pride and with progress. Over 7 years ago, Frank became president of the Ford Foundation. I had the fun of serving with him as a trustee before he was elected president. And we used to sit there and grouse about how they did things. Well, it's wonderful to live long enough so that we wonder how they do things and suddenly we become there. Well, both at home and overseas, and a third of the funds of the Ford Foundation are spent overseas. Frank just got back from a visit to India, where the original Ford Foundation overseas activities began. Frank has directed the foundation away from scholarly pursuits, gathering knowledge about the problem of poverty, the problems of equal opportunity, or human rights, refugees, to change the foundation in a way so that much more of the time, effort, and money is spent helping people help themselves. Helping people help themselves to solve their own problems in these areas and in others. like the way Frank says it. This is a quote from Frank's comment to one reporter. He said, "Today, the Ford Foundation is closer to where problems are being experienced rather than where they're being studied." If you sense that I have a great pride in having the opportunity to introduce someone I like and care for very much, I do. And it's my pleasure to introduce Frank Thomas.
Thank you, Don, and good evening. It's a great pleasure for me to be here tonight, and I thank you, North Shore Country Day School, for this invitation. I'd like to start out with several questions for us to consider both tonight and in our discussion tomorrow morning. And I hope they will provoke your thoughts both tonight and as you reflect on the subject of tonight's comments. And the questions begin with, how should a free and advanced society organize itself to help its young people become adults? What responsibilities should young people assume in return for the many privileges of American citizenship? And should community service be an integral part of the high school and college experience? Should it, in effect, be a rite of passage for every American moving from youth to adulthood? I believe these questions about the mutual responsibilities of young people and society go to the heart of the philosophy of this school: live and serve, and to the spirit of giving to others, which this annual Harold Hines address is intended to commemorate. Let me start by considering first what I mean when I use the term community or national service. Simply put, service of this sort means sacrificing some degree of personal advancement or income or freedom in order to contribute to the welfare of others. In return, those who serve receive the satisfactions that come when they face new challenges, accept new responsibilities, and work together with people of different backgrounds and ages. In an ideal sense, service is a chance to learn, grow, and experience by helping others. Taking that as a basic working definition, I'd like to explore for a few minutes some of the programs and ideas that shape the current public discussion about whether, why, and how young people should be asked to serve their communities and their country. Since 1934, when the Civilian Conservation Corps put thousands of young people to work during the Great Depression, public opinion polls have always found a majority of Americans in favor of the idea of national service. The educators, policymakers, and others who lead the debate about the issue tend to approach it in one of three ways. First, there are those who see national service from a mainly utilitarian point of view. They see it as a means of meeting a wide array of urgent problems in the nation, some social or environmental. A recent assessment of the potential use for service participants argued that nearly 3.5 million positions could be filled in tutoring and other work with children who have special education needs, in providing child care for the children of poor and moderate income, particularly women who work, in caring for the elderly, the handicapped, and other vulnerable groups in our society, and in projects to preserve our water, land, and wildlife resources. We know from experience that young people have the capacity to perform these kinds of jobs. For example, students of this school, I'm told, have contributed their time and skills to the Chicago Child Care Society, the North Shore Senior Center, the Misericordia Home, and the Jane Addams Center. Other young people in the New York City Volunteer Corps staff shelters for the homeless, take the elderly on field trips, and distribute food to the hungry. Members of the California Conservation Corps are busy today clearing trails, maintaining streams, planting trees, and helping in flood and fire emergencies. And to this day, the legacy of trails and shelters built in the nation's parks by the Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s reminds us of how much our youth have contributed and can contribute to the society. The military's demand for personnel is the second major impetus for some who speak about national service. Since the draft was ended in 1974, the United States has met its military needs through an all-volunteer force. While the force attracts an adequate number of recruits now, it may be heading for trouble in the next decade. We can see from the demographic trends in the society that the number of military-age young people is declining rapidly. Today, the armed forces enlist about 1 in every 6 eligible males. By 1995, they'll need 1 out of every 2 or 3 eligible males, and that could mean the draft will again become compelling. Many of those who call for mandatory service for all America's young people are thinking about it in this context. They believe that universal service, a system which requires each young person, male and female, to choose either military or civilian service, may be the only way the American public will find the draft politically acceptable. Others are afraid that if there is a new draft, the burdens of military service will again fall as they did during Vietnam, mostly on poor and minority youth. Both arguments, those advancing them, hope that a mandatory system of service which would give extra financial incentives to those choosing the armed forces would assure a large enough pool of young people to defend the country on the one hand and would be more equitable and democratic than the traditional military draft on the other. Still, a third constituency for national service is made up of those who see it mainly as a way to help young people develop into mature, strong, capable adults. While very few of them believe that the service experience would offer a full solution to the most serious problems of troubled adolescence, problems of drug abuse, delinquency, dropping out of school, and so on. They believe it might be of some help in those areas. And there are other needs that would clearly be met through this form of service. Perhaps the most important of these is the chance to gain an individual identity, a sense of the civic and moral value of giving, an increased conception of self-worth, and an understanding of the national and world context in which we all live. Now, some have asked, why does this seem particularly necessary and important for young people now? When America was chiefly rural and agricultural, children and teenagers were an integral part of the economic and social life of the country. In fact, the school year you observe today was originally organized around the planting and harvesting cycles of farm life. Even in the early part of the industrial age, young people worked in factories and mines until eventually the child labor and compulsory education laws were passed. But in the process, adolescents were increasingly relegated to to a marginal role in the economy. And as the society's economic need for young people declined, teenagers' own willingness to contribute to the society declined as well. For the past 15 years, the American Council on Education's annual survey of college freshmen has shown steady decreases in altruism, decreases in a sense of community, concern for the environment, and interest in the poor and vulnerable. For example, only 45% of college freshmen express a concern about developing a philosophy of life. And that's down from 65% just 10 years ago. There's been a similar decline in the numbers committed to promoting racial understanding. And this lessened interest in others has been matched by a rising interest in self. By 1984, 71% of all college freshmen rated being very well off financially as a principal life goal. That 71% is almost double the 36% who cited that objective just 10 years ago. Obtaining recognition and becoming an authority figure also went up on the scale as important objectives for college freshmen. New labels are being used to characterize this trend and this development. Materialistic, self-centered, the me generation. In some respects, these labels are all unfair. We know, for example, that there are some valid explanations for the shift in attitude. Much of the change occurred during a difficult economic time when average family incomes were going down. As a result, many students had to borrow heavily to go to college and found themselves facing large debts even before they obtained their first paying full-time job. But whatever the many reasons for these shifts in attitude, the survey results are nevertheless troubling. Our nation faces hard challenges in the decades ahead, and they include falling productivity, massive trade and budget deficits that will erode our economic position in the world, continuing terrorism and factionalism that threaten world peace and security, waning confidence in many of our major governmental and educational institutions, from our national government to our public schools, and demographic trends which see increasing proportions of America's children being born into poverty. If our basic democratic values and processes are to survive and become stronger, the current and next generation of Americans must have the intellectual and moral framework that will make it possible for them to resolve their individual interests in favor of the common good where those come into conflict. Without a sense of civic spirit, without a deep understanding of the consequences of their actions for others, particularly those less fortunate or less politically powerful than themselves, democracy simply cannot flourish. This third rationale for youth service, that it is worth doing because it is good for the development of young people, and therefore by extension is good for the country, is the rationale I personally find the most compelling. And let me tell you why. First, the other two approaches imply a large-scale, more or less monolithic system of national service, whether mandatory or voluntary. But it's far from clear that we know enough to turn either of those ideas into a successful program. We don't know, for example, whether any single system could provide the range of service opportunities that would be needed to match the enormous diversity of American young people. We also don't know how much each of those systems would cost. Take the approach of a national youth service program whose main purpose is to fulfill unmet social and environmental needs. It's possible that the cost of training, supervising, and maintaining the young people, combined with relatively low productivity that often goes with inexperience, would actually make national service more expensive than adult wage earners doing the same tasks. There are serious questions, too, about a national service program tied to the draft. As I mentioned before, one of the chief goals of this model is to make the armed forces more ethnically and economically diverse. But is it realistic to suppose that large numbers of middle and upper middle income youngsters would choose the rigors of a military life and the risks of combat over a civilian alternative? Given a choice, what would induce those of you in this room, for example, to join the Army rather than clear trails in a park or work in a child care center? How high would the financial incentives have to be to influence that decision? I'm not saying that either of those large-scale models wouldn't work, only again that we don't know enough yet to say whether they would or would not. But if we see national service primarily as a way to help young people cross over into healthy adulthood, then we're free to experiment with small programs that will help us find the answers. We're free to bring opportunities for service to young people where those young people already are. So instead of creating a massive new national institution, I think that first we need to examine our existing institutions, our high schools, colleges, employment and training programs, to see how we can add a service component to each of them. Service could then be a crucial component of a liberal college education, an integral part of the high school curriculum, an enriched form of work experience for young people engaged in job training. Given the improprieties that continue to surface in both the private and public sectors of our country, I think service could also contribute some ethical and moral weight to training in many of our professions. Fortunately, under the guidance of a diverse group of local leaders, just such a system of service opportunities has begun to emerge across the United States. At the collegiate level, the presidents of Stanford, Brown, Harvard, and Georgetown universities worked together to create the Center for Public and Community Service, located at Brown. The center has enlisted nearly 100 colleges that promote and support community service programs on their own campuses. The most active schools in that consortium have a coordinator of service activities and give special consideration for admission and scholarships to students who have performed community service in their high schools. The essential mandate of this new campus compact is not only to expand the role of service programs in colleges and universities, but also to influence public policies. One goal, for example, is an attempt to change the law in a way that would allow students to repay part of their federally guaranteed student loans through service. In job training programs, some 30 states and cities have begun service components to those programs during the last 5 years. These range from the California Conservation Corps, which is a residential statewide program that serves 18,000 youngsters a year, to the New York City Volunteer Corps, in which 800 young people do a range of work from park maintenance to caring for the homeless. Service programs have been integrated into the high school experience in a small number of schools, and some of those efforts have been underway for many years. Much of this activity is found in the private and church-related schools, such as those sponsored by the Quakers. But more and more public high schools are now developing service programs as well. The City of Atlanta recently adopted a community service requirement for graduation. The state of Utah encourages service in its public high schools. And the state of Maryland fell just one vote short of requiring community service statewide, and instead is now encouraging service programs in every high school. In Los Angeles, with the support of the Ford Foundation, the school district there and the Constitutional Rights Foundation have joined together to create a voluntary community service leadership development program that now involves 22 high schools and nearly 6,000 students. In addition, a number of recent reports on improving public high school education have recommended that a minimum number of service hours be required for graduation. The National Association of Independent Schools recently completed a profile of community service programs in private schools. That report provides some interesting food for thought for all of us who are interested in this subject. Three kinds of service programs are identified in the study relating to private secondary schools. In the study, they label them instrumental, strategic, and symbolic. An instrumental program is one which is an integral part of the mission and day-to-day activity of the school. The school makes time available in the academic schedule for students to perform their service. Committed program leaders work to ensure that the activities are truly worthwhile and take care to see that students are well matched to their service assignments. Perhaps most importantly, students are asked to reflect on the experience, and the school tries to help them understand it in the broader context of the social problems facing their communities and facing our nation. By contrast, strategic programs, the second category, tend not to be a routine part of the school's ongoing activities. Usually, a committed individual who also has other responsibilities is single-handedly keeping the program alive, usually with only a little help from the school or from other faculty members. Service occurs outside the regular academic curriculum, and no school time is allotted to discuss the broader implications of the experience. The third category, the so-called symbolic programs in the private schools, they receive only an occasional nod from the school and little, if any, support or encouragement. This report also gauged the range of service programs it found on the basis of whether they merely exposed young people to different experiences or actually engaged them intellectually and emotionally with those experiences. This distinction, I think, goes to the heart of a service program. And in fact, only a few of the programs studied were structured to engage participants fully, which means that great care and attention are necessary if youth service is to promote understanding, encourage teamwork, and foster moral and civic values. Finally, the researchers also probed the question of whether youth service should be voluntary or mandatory. The students and faculty who were against requiring a period of service as a condition of high school graduation felt that service which is not given freely could have little value for either the student or the people served. Other respondents feared that voluntary programs would never be able to attract more than a handful of students and therefore wouldn't meet the larger societal goals. It does appear, however, that mandatory programs can be fairly well established and accepted despite the problems. Many students indicated that when service was optional, it was too easy to put it off. And a few said that they'd never have overcome their fear of getting involved in new activities with a new group of people if it hadn't been a requirement of the school. Even for those who resisted mandatory programs, acknowledged that they created a tension which forced them to question their own values and beliefs. It should be clear by now that the role of service programs as a vehicle for helping young people become full players in a democratic society is not easily resolved. At each step along the way, fundamental and very difficult questions must be answered. Should service be mandatory or voluntary? Should it be national or local? In school or out of school? Should it be military or civilian? Paid or unpaid? Struggling with these questions is no idle intellectual exercise. The answers we arrive at will determine whether a comprehensive system of service and learning opportunities can and will be created for all of our young people. My own conviction is that the future of our nation and of our young people will depend to a large extent on the degree to which we, as adults, attempt to instill a service ethic in all of our major institutions which serve young people. But I also believe that ultimately the exact nature of that commitment must be decided in thousands of local settings like this one. Only rarely in public policy does a chance arise to reform the nation's major institutions while at the same time advancing the personal development of our young people. The interest in the role of service being expressed by some of the country's most influential leaders tells us that such a chance may exist today. In fact, the emerging group of high school, college, and community service and conservation corps programs springing up around the United States could provide the essential building blocks for a locally organized but nationally recognized and funded service program. Those building blocks will be only as strong as the local programs that you and others establish here and elsewhere across our country. I would say to you that this issue of how a society wrestles with the transition of its young people from adolescence to adulthood, how you transmit values which provide a stabilizing force in the society, and at the same time encourage all of the creativity and initiative necessary to keep the economic and social and political life of our country vibrant, is a set of issues on the minds of people all over the world. The more advanced and developed the society, the more time and opportunity there is to pay attention to these kinds of issues. Societies earlier in their development stage are wrestling with their ability to have food production keep pace with population growth and to deal with the distribution of the necessary food to its population. They're wrestling with forms of political governance which can truly command the respect of the government. While we haven't solved all of those problems as a country, we are significantly further along than most other countries in the world. And yet in this critical area of values, of structure, of process, of continuity with change, we are just beginning. But we're beginning, I think, in a way that is typically American. There is every variety you can think of in every community across our nation. And it's to encourage, stimulate, and expand upon those initiatives that is the job of all of us who care about this subject, our young people, and the future of our nation. Thank you for your invitation. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I'm sure that will provoke a great deal of conversation tomorrow. And again, I repeat my invitation to all of you who would like to join with us at 9:15 in the auditorium tomorrow morning.